Guys, you have to realize it's not uncommon for people when the heat gets turned up a little bit to say, oh, I'm out on this thing. You know, it's interesting. Jesus talked about this and kind of illustrated this from a variety of perspectives. Right here in Matthew chapter 13. And it's kind of interesting. Jesus talked about these different soils. He talks about the seeds being sowed. Remember, he talked about on the path, and then he talked about on the stony ground and also on the weeds, and then later in the field. And the idea behind it is that the seed is sown all over the place, but only some of it succeeds. You might remember 2 out of the 3 where they got to make choices. The reality is they chose badly. Up here in the stony ground, right there, on the stony ground, it actually says that because of persecution, they said, nope, I don't want any of this. That's these guys in our story. Right here, when it talks about the weeds, it talks about because of their focus on life and riches that they tapped out. What you have to realize is he's trying to remind us a little bit of choices that people make, and sometimes that they can be fickle. It's interesting in John chapter 2. It talks about how popular Jesus was. And beginning in verse 25, it says that Jesus actually, even though he was so popular, it says he was not entrusting himself to people because he knew what was in people. He knew that they could flip. Good illustration of that would be in John chapter 6. In John chapter 6, Jesus, it's called the feeding of the 5,000. It's actually closer to 15,000 with men, women, and children. What happened was he fed them, and through the process, they were going to come and they tried to force him to be king. Now, why would they do that? It's because they were getting free food. People get excited about free food, right? They were so excited because he provided free food for them, and so because of that, they came to force him to be king. Do you realize the very next day, Jesus said, now, okay, if you're going to follow me, here's what it's going to cost you. And 15,000 people basically walked, and it left 12 people. Now, in case you're counting, that's bad church growth, really bad church growth in one day, all right? He even said to those 12, are you going to leave me too? And some of those same people, actually later, who were going to force him to be king, yelled out, crucify him. Speaking of which, I want you to think about in Luke chapter 19, we had a thing called the Triumphal Entry right up here. This was a time where Jesus came in riding on a donkey, fulfilled a prophecy out of Zechariah when he did that. And we are told by Josephus, the Jewish historian, that during the time of the Passover, millions of people would be there. And it says the whole city was coming out to him and coming in with him. He was surrounded by people. They're all cheering his name, saying he was the Messiah, he was the one. Please don't miss this. 1 week later, they shouted, crucify him. The same people shouted, crucify him. Guys, what you have to realize is we have to understand that it's not uncommon that when the heat gets turned up a little bit, sometimes people being fickle, they kind of turn away. And the reality is it reminds us of the ridiculous idea that we would chase popularity. Guys, it's not something that is strong, that sticks with it. And through the process, guys, things can really fall apart.